Not knowing it was his buddy.
You make a great point. Farm animals are amazingly noisy.
Yeah.
They make a lot of noise.
Oh, yeah. And so somebody getting murdered, I don't know. They're not necessarily going to stand out. Okay, so much for George Higgins. The police dismissed him pretty quickly, just like the Italians. And, of course, there was his niece, Edie. I mean, she would have stood to inherit maybe 11 pounds, so she had a big motive.
Huge
motive. Apparently, I know. Charlie apparently did have the habit of leaving the toilet seat up.
No, stop it.
Yeah, I know.
Well, to be fair, I mean, 11 pounds in 1945 was 440 pounds like today, which is like, $450, which...
People have been killed for less, sadly.
I think
they have.
True. I think the exchange rate actually was more favorable back in the day, so dollar-wise it might have been worth more.
Oh, to the U.S. dollar?
Yeah.
If she had then left the country, which she did not do.
Yeah. Well, the other reason is not to think Edie did it. Again, you want to look at the family and acquaintances and friends, so she merits a look. But I think the murder was probably a man, especially the pitchfork. I mean, the pitchfork was driven into the ground so hard, apparently it took 2 policemen to pull it out of the ground.
So I was going to ask you about that, because when I was doing the reading and I saw this stuff about the pitchfork, what I couldn't understand was it that the sheer act of pulling the pitchfork out of the ground, the tines out of the ground, took 2 men, or had it been jammed so far into the ground and then at such a strange, funky angle to wedge it under the hedge that it took 2 people. Do you see where I'm getting here?
It might have taken 2 guys to get it untangled from the hedge or something.
Yeah,
it's hard to see, especially...
Well,
if the ground was soft and wet, which I assume it was, it's hard to imagine it being that
I was going to
hard.
say, if the ground was wet and soft when it happened, I mean, there's a couple hours elapsed, and it's February. So, like in Portland, for instance, right, if something happens midday, heat of the day, in February, and then temperatures drop down to freezing, it's possible it could have been shoved in the ground when it was kind of wet and soggy, and then subsequently froze and the ground hardened around it.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions about this. I mean, I don't disagree that it was done with some extreme force.
Yeah, so probably a guy.
Also, I think he was probably strong enough that he could have defended himself against his niece.
Probably. Well, and also...
I also don't see that she had any motive, because literally he had raised her. Now, not that patricide doesn't happen.
But also there's the whole question of, I think she was at her job at that time.
Yeah, she was working.
She was at her job, and then also, having dual income in that time is better than having single income.
So, a lot better.
Killing off somebody who's bringing income into the house, maybe not.
Not a smart move. And also there were better ways for her to do it that were less suspicious. I mean, she could have like spiked his tea and sedated him and then smothered him with a pillow.
Yeah.
He was 74 freaking years old.
Yeah.
And nobody, if he'd just woken up dead in his bed,
if he had just woken up dead in his bed.
Exactly.
She had woken up to find him dead in his bed, is what Joe meant to say.
On top of the morning tea, I'm feeling kind of dead. But anyway, she had better ways, so I'm going to rule Edie out if that's okay with you.
I would too,
agree.
Yeah. Next local person was the favorite suspect, Alfred J. Potter, the guy who owned the farm. Was actually scrutinized quite extensively by Scotland Yard. It happened on his land, and there were some things about him, like the local constable that came to the crime scene initially before the Stratford police arrived, said that Potter seemed nervous and kind of upset and complained about being cold, and he also wanted to get out of there. As soon as the Stratford police showed up, he left, and the constable thought that was kind of odd.
So the constable thought that was odd because he shouldn't have been squeamish around death, because he worked on a farm.
Exactly.
So he sees animals getting killed all the time.
But that doesn't mean,
that's a little different from a human being getting murdered.
It is, but it also, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but was the Furs an animal farm?
That's a good question. I just, I think there was. I heard talk about him having to deal with heifers and stuff like that. So I know they had at least some cattle.
Mm-hmm. But were they slaughtered regularly for food? And what's to say he didn't contract that work out?
Well, there's all kinds of stuff that you do on farms, like castrating animals and all kinds of good fun stuff. That's
veterinary duties happen.
But that's different than doing it to a human.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, very much so. You can be kind of inured to the whole thing, but not only was it Charlie a human being, but he was somebody that Potter had known for like 5 years.
Yeah.
So obviously finding him brutally murdered
that wouldn't be
might
fun.
have been a big shock. Or maybe
he might have a really good reason for being uncomfortable at the scene.
Yeah.
That was totally normal.
Yeah, pretty much. So I'm gonna say that doesn't really mean much. And of course there was the whole time that he saw Charlie in the fields, which changed like several times. At first, he came out of the local pub about, he said around noontime, and was walking through the village, and he said he looked up on Mayon Hill and saw Charlie about 500 yards or so away, working on the hedge. He said the time was 12:10. Later, he changed that time to 12:15. Later on, changed it to 12:20. And then when they had the inquest hearing, he said at that time that he saw Charlie up on Man Hill at about 12:30, and that he was standing there in shirt sleeves and not actually doing anything at the moment, just standing there. So maybe he saw Charlie, maybe he saw the murderer.
I guess we've talked about this before, though. I mean, people's sense of time is so fickle.
Oh yeah.
And changes, especially as you're trying to remember. And if he had been drinking a little bit, I mean, it's possible that...
So they'd had lunch. He wasn't at the pub because he was boozing it up. He had met a friend after doing something that morning that I cannot... But they went there and they had lunch.
Yeah. And a couple drinks.
But I'm sorry, but if I sit down at lunch and I have 2 beers with my lunch, my faculties are in place.
I'm not saying that his faculties are not in place. I'm just saying that, like, even me, totally sober, can think about how long something took, a day or two ago and say, I think it took a half hour when in reality it took me 10 minutes.
No, I'm just saying that I don't think that he was he was sauced in it.
No, I'm not saying that. I just think it could have affected his
sense of time.
Oh, yeah.
Got it, yeah.
For sure. And I don't know if the custom in the pubs in Britain is to have bar time like we have here in America, where you set your clocks ahead. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they do that too. So that could
I don't know.
Or behind.
Timekeeping. Yeah. That can totally screw you up. There was another interesting point, which is that several days after the murder, police said that they were going to fingerprint the weapons and see if they could ID the killer from that. And that's when Potter said, oh, by the way, I should probably mention to you that I touched the murder weapons. I touched both the pitchfork, and the slash hook, just so you know. And the police are like, why did you do that? And Potter says, well, Harry Beasley, remember Harry Beasley went up there with Edie and Potter and found the body. He said, well, Harry Beasley said that I should check the body and make sure he's not still alive. So I got kind of close to him, and I think I'm pretty sure I touched the murder weapons. So when police asked Harry Beasley about this, Beasley said, no, I said no such thing to him. And Beasley also said he didn't recall seeing Potter touch the weapons at all.
In Potter's defense, though, Beasley and Edie left the scene to go drop her back at the house and get her settled, and then go get the constable. Mm-hmm. So Potter's just hanging out there by himself.
Yeah.
So it could have possibly happened. It could have been a passing, even just so much as a sarcastic comment. You should probably check to make sure he's alive.
Yeah, that might, as your partner, you might want to say something like that. Yeah, sure. And so it's entirely possible he did touch them in all innocence. That obviously raised some suspicions with the police. The fact that he waited several days, although, again, the fact that he waited and then said, oh, by the way, after the police said we're going to fingerprint the weapons. Oh, by the way, I touched them. And by the way, they found no fingerprints on the weapons, which is strange because at least Charlie should have been on there, but maybe the killer wiped him off. I don't know. But again, that's also something you can kind of forget too.
Yeah.
Stressful moment and all that, and suddenly, and it doesn't strike you as important that you touch those things.
Yeah.
And then when you hear about the fingerprint, it's like, oh, I should probably let you guys know that I touched these things. So, and the only other thing about it that was even suspicious about Potter is apparently he'd been skimming.
He had
been skimming, yeah. He'd been apparently over-reporting the time that his laborers, including Charlie, were putting on the farm. and then pocketing the difference.
Which was not an uncommon practice.
No, not really.
Managers to this day do that crap.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So, and that's certainly not a motive for murder. Even if Charlie had found out, Charlie might have been like, it's what I would expect. Or, I mean, certainly Charlie's not going to go, I'm going to rat you out, and you're going to have to pay your dad back the sum of 20 pounds. And then he's going to get murdered over that. I can't quite see that. And how the hell did Charlie find out who told him, and why did he not tell the police?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, how did Charlie get a hold of the books is what I want to know.
Yeah. And there was another last piece of potentially incriminating information, which apparently Potter's trousers had some marks on the front of them, which appeared to be blood.
Didn't he explain that away because he had to go get a heifer out of a ditch?
Well, the thing about it is he worked on a farm. I mean, you're going to get dirt, blood, and all kinds of stuff on you.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. So, I mean, Potter was, I think, definitely a strong suspect. Well, not that strong.
He was a suspect.
He was
stronger than any we've said so far.
He was the strongest suspect, but still not much of a suspect, really, frankly. They'd still never found a real motive. And,
It also seems like with the kind of damage that was done, you would expect more than just a few flecks of blood on the front of your pants.
That's true.
If you slice a guy's throat open with a bill hook, there's going to be blood everywhere.
Be way more blood.
Oh yeah, for sure. So that's a good point. And obviously, if he did do it, he would have run home and changed. But then, if he had marks on his pants, it's because there's something else that he did in the farm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just not seeing it with Potter. I just don't think it was him. So that leads to our next theory, which is maybe it was a serial killer. Maybe it was just a kind of a random thing. As it turns out, in England in 1945, there were actually a lot of people out wandering the countryside because people in some of the cities had actually been bombed out. They lost their homes. They were kind of refugees within England. Other people decided to get the hell out of the cities just for safety's sake because they were catching some bombs from the Germans. And so there was a lot more mobility in England at this time than there normally was. So there were people out in the countryside wandering around. It's very easy for some ne'er-do-well from London to pop into some little village or another and just murder somebody.
But it was a pretty stylized murder.
Yeah, it really was.
And if what was his name? The investigator? Fabian. If he was able to dig up something that happened over 100 years ago that was quote unquote identical, it seems he would have been able to find if somebody
brought that to him.
He didn't dig it up.
Somebody brought the 70-year-old murder.
Sure, but there was enough stuff around this that I don't know.
Oh yeah, by the way. I forgot to mention that murder from 1885. It turns out that was a little bit exaggerated. Yeah, it turns out that James Haywood, the murderer, actually just attacked her with a pitchfork and didn't pin her to the ground. He just stabbed her,
And she didn't die right away.
No, she was taken off to, I think, her daughter's home, and she eventually died
later that day.
Yeah, late in the evening.
She did die from the wound.
Oh yeah, she definitely died. He was tried for it, but he wasn't hanged, as the story says.
He went to the sanitarium.
Yeah, he was declared not guilty because of insanity, and he spent the rest of his life in an insane asylum where he died. And so that story was not quite correct. And there was also some allegations that potentially, and so again, this is
such a reach.
Well, it's a tenuous connection, and again, it doesn't really mean much. I mean, in rural England, and again, and probably a lot of other places too, where people are living in these little villages and farms, probably a lot of those people are related in some tenuous way or another, second, third cousins. I mean, probably all over the place. So it doesn't mean squat, really. Well, back to our serial killer, I guess there's not much to say about that, except that, if he went around and murdered a few people here and there, and if he varied his MO a little bit. One of the things you got to remember about Charlie is that he was 74 years old. He'd been working outside his entire life. He probably looked older than he was from just all that exposure.
Easy target, you mean?
Yeah, and so you see this guy, walking with a cane and everything, hobbling around, about to work on the hedge, and you're thinking, easy pickings. And then
walk over him and shove him down.
I know, and it turns out that the old guy's a lot stronger than he actually looks. He puts up a fight, in which case, you start using all the weapons at your disposal, and so maybe it turned into sort of a bigger brouhaha than you actually intended it to.
So there's another theory on here that I think is more appropriate for this, but calling it a serial killer, I think is an incorrect naming for this entire scenario that we've just talked about.
Yeah.
I mean, this could be just a random attack. That's not a serial killer scenario to me.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I'm careful to throw. I don't want to throw serial killer on everything.
No, exactly.
I mean, granted, that gets us higher rankings in iTunes, but it's not the truth.
Yeah.
No, not at all. Okay, the theory you're thinking about, I think, is the one labeled "thrill kill" by local high school kids.
No, that actually.
Oh, it's not that one.
That one's a good one, though. Let's talk about that one.
I like that one. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, that's the entire theory right there.
I know.
That kind of is, yeah. So yeah. Well, you've heard all the evidence. I like it, but that's
good evidence.
Yeah.
And you made it up. That's why you like it.
They made a movie about this. I Know What You Did Last Valentine's Day. And yeah. Okay, well, I'll move on to our next theory, which is actually kind of similar to the serial killer, which is a robbery gone wrong.
It's essentially identical.
Well, again, if you're one of these guys and you're on the road, you're kind of homeless. You've been made into a refugee and stuff. I mean, it might have occurred to you to do a little robbery. The way you picked Charlie, I don't know, he didn't exactly look like a wealthy guy, but at the same time, he might have looked like really easy pickings.
So the only thing that I can think about to make this, or not the high school kids, but the random killer bit work, is Charlie was known to take his lunch with him. And so if you are walking on the road or you're walking through the area and you're hungry and you see a guy with a sandwich and he's got it and an apple, and you say, "I'm sorry, I'm really, really hungry. Could I have an apple, please?" And he cusses you out for asking for an apple because you and every other Tom, Dick, and Harry are coming through here and asking me my food. Stop it. And somebody loses their mind over that. I mean, that's the best motive I can come up for with the random attack scenario that we're talking about.
I don't know.
Because money, he doesn't look rich.
He doesn't look rich, but he also seems like the kind of guy who totally would give you an apple if you were walking past.
He probably, at the very least, would have been polite about it. Although you never know, his fly was undone. He might have said, "Oh, you don't want the sandwich that bad?" Well.
Oh, shit.
Oh, no.
Wow, that took it down a different alley.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding. But yeah, again, it could have been, like you say, it's sort of a random sort of race thing. Somebody wanted to rob him, and then it turns out, like I said in the previous theory, that they bit off more than they thought they were going to be biting off, and they had to, basically really do a lot to subdue Charlie, and in the end, they wound up going a little overboard, because by this time, especially if you're just kind of have a punk mentality, you're thinking, "Oh, this old guy should have been a pushover. Now I'm angry." And then you go after him with great guns.
I guess on the other hand, he bought this watch used. It wasn't some family heir, and that was the only thing that was really missing from him, right?
Yeah, and it might not have been taken from him. Maybe he didn't have it on him.
Yeah, I mean, or he did have it on him, and when somebody says, "All right, old man, give me your watch," like. Are you really gonna? I don't know. I mean, obviously, because he's been dead for longer than I've been alive.
Well,
but I guess in my mind, I kind of think, like, really, you're gonna fight somebody over a crappy little watch? I mean, okay, but I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. Charlie might have just like, especially from that older generation. I mean, people might have been more inclined to look at things in moral terms. And thinking, this guy wants to rob me, I'm not going to permit it just on general principles.
Yeah.
Screw him.
Yeah,
it could have been that.
Stiff upper lip and all that.
And Charlie might have felt like actually he was well armed, and maybe he had one of his weapons on him.
He knew how to use what was it? It wasn't called the bill hook.
The slash hook. Yeah.
He was obviously a rather handy with a slash hook.
Yeah.
And probably would have felt like he could defend himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but apparently not quite capable enough, unfortunately for him. So on to our next theory. I mean, the robbery gone wrong is really a possibility, I think. But, who knows? Again, sad to tell you, we haven't reached quite the end here. This one is probably not going to get solved, not for the next 30 seconds at least, until we solve it. Okay, I'm going to name the killer. Jack the Ripper. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, Jack would have been probably at least 75 in this time, because his last murder was in 1888, correct?
I think that sounds right. Yeah, it's been so long since I've looked at his dates.
Yeah, I think it was 1888.
We'll just say right in that ballpark.
Yeah, so let's say Jack started young and he was 18. Okay, he would have been born in 1870, same year as Charlie, and maybe he just
So it's
wanted...
two old codgers fighting in the field.
Yeah. That's why Jack.
Wait, was the wound from left to right or from right to left? I'm sorry. This is fun, but
that's a good one.
No.
But yeah, I know. Well, there's also, of course, the Zodiac Killer. Let's not leave